The hallway smelled of disinfectant and wilted carnations from the clinic gift shop. My knees ached from the walk across the polished floor when the phone rang, a shrill tone slicing through the sterile air. I answered without thinking, expecting it to be the nurse, maybe a reminder about my blood pressure results. Instead, it was Lily. Her voice was sharp, metallic, too loud for the quiet corridor. "We're leaving tomorrow, Mom. I already sold your mountain house by the lake. Bye." Just like that. No greeting, no pause, no tenderness. A guillotine disguised as a sentence. She didn't know. She couldn't know. Only a week earlier I had transferred the deed into another name. She thought she had gutted me clean, but she was clawing at an empty carcass. I laughed. Not out of joy. Not even bitterness. The sound surprised me, low, broken, yet steady. It echoed down the clinic hallway. People turned to look. And for the first time in years, Lily's voice trembled. She had always been sure of herself when speaking to me, certain that every word she dropped was law. Now she faltered. "I am 71 years old. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 6 months a widow. Frank, my husband of 48 years, died one ordinary morning, as suddenly as a curtain falling on a play that had no ending. We were sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling through the curtains, steam curling from our coffee mugs. He looked at me, eyes warm, and said, 'Good morning, darling.' Then his hand slackened around the cup, his head tilted, and just like that, silence. That silence has never left. It lives in the corners of the house, between the ticking of the clock and the creak of the stairs. After the funeral, Lily stepped into that silence like a savior. She appeared with groceries, with gentle reminders of doctor checkups, with quick kisses on my cheek. She helped fold Frank's shirts, speaking in that careful voice reserved for widows and children. First I believed her. I thought grief had drawn us closer, that she was finally seeing me not just as Mom, but as a woman who had given her life to a family. But looking back, I see the pattern. The groceries weren't generosity, they were reconnaissance. She insisted on checking expiration dates, on rearranging cabinets, on discarding things she deemed junk. Each visit was a subtle inspection, a quiet survey of what I owned, what I might leave behind. The doctor trips were less about my health than about proximity to my purse. When she drove me, she always had to stop for gas, always forgot her card. I paid. And when I once handed her cash for the copay, I later found the receipt crumpled in her bag. The copay had been covered by insurance. It wasn't care. It was convenience. Now the truth burned clear. Her announcement about the lake house wasn't a betrayal that erupted out of nowhere. It was the culmination of months, maybe years of practice. She thought she had played me well enough to make her theft smooth. That lake house. I saw it in my mind as she spoke. The cream-colored siding Frank painted himself every summer, the porch swing we bought secondhand, the way the morning mist curled over the water like breath. Lily was 15 the first time she swam in that lake. She had run from the dock, shrieking, her long hair whipping behind her. Frank had stood beside me, grinning with pride at her joy. She never saw the envelopes of overdue notices I tucked away in drawers. She never knew how many nights Frank stayed late at the factory so we could keep it. To her it was just property. To me it was a sanctuary, the place where grief softened and laughter echoed across the water. And then there was Frank's Chevy wagon. The faded blue one he polished every Sunday until the paint shone like it was new. He had loved that car more than most men love their own youth. He taught Lily to drive in it, his hand steady on the wheel when hers shook. I still remember the day she spilled soda across the seats, bursting into tears, convinced she had ruined it forever. Frank had laughed, ruffling her hair, telling her, "It's just a seat, sweetheart. Cars forgive." Now Eric, her husband, my son-in-law, had sold it too, as if decades of memory could be pawned off for cash. But I didn't cry. Not for the house, not for the car, not even for Lily. What I felt instead was stranger. A calm so deep it felt like steel sliding into place inside my chest. Because I remembered. 3 days before Frank died, he had called me into the bedroom. His voice was weaker than usual, his breath shallow, but his eyes, those soft, knowing eyes, were steady. He slid a manila envelope into the top drawer of my dresser. "Open when you're ready," he said. Nothing more. He kissed my hand, and 3 days later he was gone. I hadn't been ready then. I couldn't bear to be. The envelope remained untouched, its presence almost accusatory each time I folded laundry nearby. But now, with Lily's voice still buzzing in my ear like a fly, I knew. I was ready. I walked out of the clinic into the gray morning air, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. Lily thought she had won. She thought she had erased me with a single call. But the tremor in her voice at my laughter told me otherwise. For the first time since Frank's death, I wasn't the grieving widow waiting to be cared for. I was something else entirely. And I had an envelope waiting for me. That evening, when the sky deepened into the bruised purple of dusk, I walked into the bedroom. The air was still, the kind of silence that pressed down heavy. I opened the dresser drawer with a hand that shook, not from weakness but from the weight of choice. There it was, the manila envelope Frank had tucked beneath my folded sweaters. Its edges were already soft from months of waiting, patient as a sentinel. I sat on the bed, the quilt beneath me still carrying faint threads of Frank's scent, coffee engine grease, the faint cologne he wore only on Sundays. For 6 months I had avoided this moment. But Lily's call that morning had turned avoidance into cowardice. And cowardice had no place left in me. I slit the flap open carefully, as if afraid of cutting through something alive. Inside were documents, thick, neatly clipped stacks of papers, each labeled with Frank's unhurried handwriting. Property deeds, bank account statements, corporate certificates, and, folded between them, a letter addressed in his hand. Evelyn. My throat tightened. I unfolded the paper, and his voice seemed to rise from the page, speaking through ink and memory. Asterisk, my darling. If you are reading this, it means I could not stay as long as I wished. Forgive me for leaving you with silence, but I needed to leave you with certainty. For years, I have set aside pieces of our labor. Quietly, carefully, without fuss. I never wanted you to feel the weight of numbers pressing down on your joy, or the shadow of money darkening our family. And I never wanted Lily to confuse her love for us with what we owned. Everything is held under Franklin Holdings, a company in name only, but real enough to protect us. You, Evelyn, are its sole owner now. The lake house is not the only property. There are 6 others, each steady as stone, each capable of carrying you if ever the world turns unkind. There is a brick loft building in the River District. Ironically, it is where Lily and Eric live now, paying rent they think belongs to strangers. There are also shares in 3 small businesses that have grown stronger with time. And there are accounts, quiet, unseen, enough to make your last years comfortable, free, and safe. I hid it not to deceive you, but to protect us. The world changes people when money appears. I feared Lily's love might shift if she knew. I feared she might see us not as parents but as providers. If she is by your side now, I hope it is out of love, not expectation. Use this inheritance as you see fit. Use it for yourself or for her or for no one at all. Wealth is not a number, it is choice. And I want you to have choices, my darling. Yours always, Frank Asterisk. The words blurred as my eyes filled. Not with sorrow this time, but with a deep ache of gratitude. And with the sharp sting of irony. Lily had discarded me thinking I had nothing. She had torn through my life like a thief rushing into an empty room. She believed she was seizing scraps, unaware she had passed by the banquet laid silently beneath her feet. I laid the letter on the quilt and spread the documents out, one by one. The lake house, of course, still ours, untouchable. 6 other properties, modest but solid. The brick loft building, right there in the River District, standing like a hidden fortress while Lily and Eric strutted within its walls, blind to whose roof covered their heads. The businesses astonished me most. A hardware store chain, a logistics company, a bakery franchise I vaguely remembered Frank mentioning decades ago. All small once, all grown. All mine. I sat in silence, tracing his handwriting on the margins of the deeds. Frank had always been steady, never boastful, never reckless. While I clipped coupons and stretched meals to make ends meet, he had quietly planted seeds. He never flaunted, never even hinted. I used to scold him for being too cautious, for working late nights fixing machines when others left early. Now I saw the truth. He wasn't working for them. He was building for me. And Lily? Lily had mocked my thrift, sneered at the furniture I kept, called Frank's Chevy a relic. She told me I lived in the past, that I should sell, simplify, downsize. I see it now, her words weren't advice. They were probes. She wanted to dismantle history piece by piece until nothing remained but cash she could siphon. I rose from the bed and walked slowly through the house, touching objects as if they had been transformed overnight. The chipped teacup Frank always used, which Lily once called junk. The rug with its worn edges, which she insisted I replace. The family photograph she urged me to digitize and declutter. All of it carried weight. Not in money but in meaning. And she had reduced it all to a balance sheet. I returned to the envelope, folded the papers neatly back, and placed them in a lockbox beneath the bed. My hands did not shake anymore. My grief had shifted. It was no longer raw, open, consuming. It had hardened into something else, into strategy. For 6 months, I had moved like a shadow through my own life, half woman, half widow. But tonight I felt the first stirring of power. Not the kind Lily sought, crude and immediate, but the quiet power of knowledge, of preparation, of choice. I whispered into the stillness, half to Frank, half to myself. You were right. Wealth is choice. And I choose not to be broken. Outside, the last light drained from the sky. Inside, I sat with the envelope that was no longer just paper. It was a map to another life, one Frank had prepared in silence, one I would now have to live out loud. And I knew this much. Lily would never see me coming. The next morning the phone rang again. I had barely slept, my head filled with Frank's letter and the cold precision of his planning. When I answered, Lily's voice was different. Not sharp this time but soft, practiced, coated in sugar like medicine meant to be swallowed by the unwilling. Mom, she began, a sigh woven into the word. We thought about it, and we left you 30% of the money from the house and the truck. Enough for a while, you know? We didn't want you to feel forgotten. 30%. Enough for a while. I almost laughed again, but the sound would have given me away. So I let silence stretch, as if I were absorbing the kindness of her gesture. In truth, my pulse hammered so loudly I thought she might hear it through the line. We're flying to Asia for 6 months, she continued. Her voice brightened, rehearsed cheer echoing across the miles already growing between us. A little adventure. Eric's been so stressed, you know. We need this. And you'll be fine, Mom. Really. We made sure you have enough. I murmured something vague, something that could pass for thanks, though my chest burned. After she hung up, I walked to the window. Outside, their laughter floated in the air like confetti after a parade. Lily in her crisp travel clothes, Eric with his careless swagger. They loaded luggage into the trunk, bright suitcases lined up like trophies. They kissed in the driveway, bold as thieves celebrating a heist. Then the car pulled away, their joy spilling out behind them. What cut deepest wasn't the money. It wasn't even the lies. It was how easily I had been erased. They left without looking back. No thought of who would water the plants, who would check the mail, who would sit alone in a house that had carried their childhood and their Sunday dinners. I was no longer part of their picture. I had been cropped out, edited away. I stood there for a long time, my reflection faint in the glass. And then I turned. The kitchen table became my battlefield. I spread Frank's papers across it, one by one. Deeds. Statements. Certificates. Each piece of paper was a weapon. Each line of ink a reminder that I was not helpless. The grief I had carried for half a year shifted into a new form, into calculation. Rage would have been easier. Rage burns bright and fast. But rage consumes. I would not be consumed. I would plan. I dialed Carter's number. He had been the attorney at Frank's funeral. A tall man with solemn eyes. One of those who shakes hands with both weight and respect. At the time I barely noticed him. Now, his name in Frank's documents told me he was more than a mourner. He was an ally. His office smelled of polished wood and something sharp, like marble floors washed too often. He greeted me with formality, no pity in his gaze. I liked that. I was tired of pity. I laid Frank's envelope before him. He examined each document with the patience of a craftsman. When he looked up, his words carried certainty. Mrs. Hart, you are the sole owner of Franklin Holdings. Every property, every account, every share belongs to you. Your daughter's so-called sale of the lake house is invalid. Legally impossible. They attempted fraud, but they cannot take what you never signed away. Fraud. The word rang in the room like a gavel. He leaned back. We could take this to court. Press charges. The law is clear, your rights are untouched. But I shook my head. Court would be noise, spectacle, headlines. Court would make Lily a victim in the eyes of others, spinning tales of misunderstanding and confusion. I wanted none of it. I don't want noise, I said. My voice was steady. I want quiet, deliberate. Lessons learned in silence are the ones that last. Carter studied me, then nodded slowly. Then anonymity. Quiet corrections. Their attempt will vanish as if it never existed. The power remains with you. I gathered the papers, smoothing them into order, and felt a strange clarity wash over me. For months I had been drowning in loss, dragging Frank's absence like chains. But now, I was holding a key. That evening the house seemed different. The same ticking clock, the same faded rug, the same silence pressing in. Yet something had shifted. I was no longer its prisoner. I was its steward. I brewed tea instead of coffee. Frank's mug sat across from me, empty but not abandoned. I spoke aloud, though the room was empty. They think they've erased me. They think I'll live on crumbs while they fly to sunsets and beaches. But you knew, Frank. You knew I'd need this. You gave me choices. Outside, the neighborhood moved as always. Dogs barked, children called, cars pulled in and out of driveways. To them, I was still the poor widow, the woman left behind. Let them think so. Let them bring pies and soft voices. I would smile, not play the role. But inside, under the quiet lamps, I would spread ledgers and deeds like a general studying maps. The war had already begun. I learned quickly that grief and strategy require different masks. Grief asks you to bend under the weight of pity. Strategy demands you stand tall in silence. So I began to live a double life. By day I was Evelyn the widow. I let neighbors hover. Let them press pies into my hands and murmur soft condolences. I nodded, accepted their casseroles, wore the tired shawl that made me look frilier than I felt. When Mrs. Talbot patted my hand and whispered, "At least you still have Lily looking after you," I smiled faintly, as though I believed it. They all thought I was surviving on scraps, the kind daughter's charity keeping me afloat. Let them. Pity is camouflage. But when the sun dipped low and curtains closed, I became someone else. The kitchen table turned into my command post. By lamplight, Carter and I worked through stacks of files, untangling the false sale of the lake house, transferring Franklin Holdings into my direct control, securing every key and lock of the empire Frank had built in silence. Carter was discreet, his voice always low, as if walls themselves had ears. "They'll never know until you choose," he told me, sliding documents across the polished wood. "The lake house is yours irrevocably. The loft building is nearly transferred. Once the filings are complete, even Eric's banks won't be able to touch it." I signed papers with hands steadier than I thought possible. Widowhood had taught me to shake, but ownership steadied me again. Each signature was a step back into myself. Still I kept the mask on. To the outside world, I was the poor woman left behind, struggling on a meager allowance. At church, people pressed my hand with pity. In the grocery store, the cashier whispered, "It's so good Lily helps you." I thanked them all, wearing my grief like a costume, because sometimes invisibility is the strongest armor. Mornings belonged to Frank still. I brewed tea at the same table where he used to polish apples with his calloused hands. Evenings belonged to spreadsheets and ledgers, where I learned to read the language Frank had hidden in margins and codes. Slowly, I became fluent in the empire of silence he had left me. Within weeks, the lake house was legally mine again. Not that it had ever slipped away, but now every false stain was erased. Carter called it a paper cleansing. Called it justice. The loft building where Lily and Eric lived was next. Carter's tone grew sharper as he uncovered Eric's games. "He's leveraged the property as collateral, though he doesn't own it," Carter explained, his brows knit. "Banks are circling, but they'll find nothing to seize. It's all under you." I pictured them there. Lily arranging flowers in a vase she didn't buy, Eric laughing with friends on a balcony that was never his. Their laughter was built on air. Soon they would feel the ground shift. One afternoon I boarded the bus to the lake house. I sat among strangers who smelled of rain and diesel, clutching the strap of my bag where Carter's documents rested. As the bus turned onto the winding road, the cream-colored house appeared through the trees. My breath caught. It stood exactly as it always had, Porch light faint against the dusk, shutters still crooked on the left. The so-called buyers greeted me at the gate. A young couple, hands entwined, faces hesitant. "We were told," the woman explained carefully, "that an ailing old woman needed quick cash. We thought we were helping." The lie stung sharper than I expected. Lily had painted me as desperate, sick, crumbling. I forced a smile, my voice even. "You've been misled. This house was never for sale." Carter's paperwork closed the matter swiftly. The couple left embarrassed, whispering apologies as they drove away. I walked through the rooms alone. Dust coated the windowsills, but Frank's touch lingered everywhere. The hand-carved banister, the bookshelf he built, the dent in the wall where Lily once kicked a ball too hard. Every corner breathed memory. My hands trailed over surfaces as though they were living skin. On the porch, I sat in the swing Frank had hung with rope thick as a man's wrist. The lake shimmered under the fading light. I whispered, "They tried to sell you away, Frank, but you're still here." That night, under stars sharp as needles, I called Carter. "Recover the Chevy," I told him. My voice was steel. Silence stretched across the line before he answered. "That may be trickier. She had you sign power of attorney, did she not?" I closed my eyes, remembering the days after the funeral. Papers slid in front of me, words blurred by tears, Lily's voice coaxing. "It's just to make things easier, Mom. Just until you're stronger." "Yes," I admitted quietly. "She tricked me." But Carter's tone held confidence. "Even so, a sale under false pretenses can be reversed. Leave it with me." I hung up, staring at the stars. My double life stretched wide. Frail widow by day, quiet general by night. It was exhausting yet invigorating. Each lie I let them believe became another thread in my shield. By the time I returned to the city, the mask fit comfortably. Neighbors spoke in gentle tones. I nodded, offering the smile of a woman barely holding on. But inside, the empire was returning, one asset at a time. They thought they had erased me. Instead, I was erasing them line by line, signature by signature. The Chevy was the hardest piece to recover. Harder even than the house. It wasn't just a car. It was Frank's ritual, his Sunday devotion, his mirror of pride. Every weekend he would polish the paint until the faded blue gleamed. Children from the block teased him, called it a relic, but he only smiled, saying, "It runs smoother than most of your parents' cars." He wasn't wrong. That engine purred like a well-fed cat. When Carter called to say he had tracked down the buyer, my chest tightened. "He paid little for it, thinking it was an old man's scrap," Carter explained. "I offered a modest sum to buy it back. He agreed without resistance." "Did Lily sign it away under my power of attorney?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes. In the weeks after Frank's passing." His voice was measured, but I could hear the steel under it. "But now it's returned. No more signatures against you." The following morning, Carter parked the Chevy in my driveway. My knees buckled when I saw it. Dust clung to its surface, but beneath the dirt, the car breathed Frank's presence. I placed my palm against the hood, cold metal under warm skin, and whispered, "Welcome home." The neighbors watched, puzzled. To them, I was the widow who had lost everything. Now the wagon stood gleaming in the sun, like a ghost restored. "Isn't that Frank's old car?" one called out. I smiled faintly. Yes, it found its way back. But Carter was not finished. His next visit carried news that curdled the air between us. "Eric has been reckless," he said, adjusting his glasses. "He has accumulated debts, substantial ones, over 200,000, and he used the loft as collateral, though he has no legal claim. The banks are circling." I felt no shock, only confirmation. Eric was always restless, always reaching further than his hands could grasp. He strutted about with new gadgets, spoke of investments, promised Lily a life of glitter she mistook for substance. It was inevitable. "What happens now?" I asked. Carter's eyes met mine. "We serve eviction when they return. It will be brutal." "Then let it be brutal." My voice carried no tremor. Kindness taught her nothing. She laughed while selling my life away. Let her feel the floor vanish beneath her feet. Still Carter hesitated. "You are certain?" "Yes. Do it." And so the notice was prepared. An official clinical sheet of paper with black ink that cut sharper than knives. It would wait like a viper until Lily returned. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip long before Lily set foot on the soil again. Whispers traveled faster than birds. "They're not in Asia," someone muttered at the corner store. "Eric is drowning in debt." Another whispered outside church. "I heard the bank froze his accounts. They're finished." I let the rumors swirl, said nothing, smiled politely when asked. Silence was my ally. One night I stood outside beneath the stars, the Chevy glinting faintly under the moonlight. My fingers traced the cool hood and I whispered, "Thank you, Frank. You gave me more than assets. You gave me the strength to choose." The next morning I called Carter. "When they land, deliver the letter." He understood. "It will be done." The letter was simple. 30 days to vacate. No explanations, no appeals. A hammer wrapped in parchment. For years, Lily had spoken to me in tones of superiority, as though I were a child needing guidance. Now the roles had reversed. She would return to find her fortress built on sand, her illusions shattered by ink. I pictured her face when she read it, the tightening jaw, the disbelief, the flicker of panic. Perhaps she would try to charm her way out, perhaps rage. Either way, it no longer mattered. Power had returned quietly, piece by piece. The lake house, the Chevy, the holdings, the deeds. Each recovered asset was another bone of my spine straightening. And the final stroke, the eviction, would remind Lily that inheritance is not entitlement, and motherhood is not servitude. I was ready. At 8 sharp the phone rang. I had been awake for hours, pacing between the kitchen and living room, the eviction letter folded neatly on the counter. The dawn light slanted through the curtains, sharp as a blade. "Mom!" Lily's voice cracked, frantic. "No sugar in it this time. Some company, Franklin Holdings, says I have 30 days to vacate the loft. It's a mistake, right? It has to be. Mom, please say it's a mistake." I pressed the receiver closer, let silence stretch just long enough to make her breath hitch. Then I answered evenly, "Come over. We'll talk." She arrived within the hour. I opened the door to find a woman I barely recognized. Lily, my confident daughter, the one who always carried herself as though the world bent to her will, now stood gaunt in the doorway. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair unwashed, her eyes swollen from nights of crying. The perfume she once wore like armor was gone. In its place was the sour tang of sweat and despair. "Mom!" Her voice broke. She stepped inside and clutched her arms around herself. For a moment she looked like a child again, small and frightened. "Eric's gone. He ran off with some waitress in Bangkok. Took everything. The accounts are frozen, the banks keep calling and..." Her words dissolved into sobs. I motioned to the sofa. She sat, shoulders curled, as if her bones could no longer hold her upright. "Can I stay here? Just for a while?" she asked, eyes darting around the familiar living room like a beggar surveying a church. I sat beside her, slow and deliberate. Then I wrapped my arms around her. The embrace was not born of softness, it was strategy. In her collapse I saw opportunity. She clung to me, sobbing into my shoulder while inside me a voice whispered, "Now you understand erasure." That evening she produced another envelope, smaller, more worn. "I found this among Eric's things," she said, her voice wary. "It had your name on it. Dad's handwriting. I don't know why Eric had it." My heart stuttered. She placed it in my hand, and my fingers trembled despite myself. Frank's looping script covered the front. "Evelyn." I opened it carefully, as though the paper might disintegrate. Inside was a safety deposit box key taped to a card. Beneath it, a note written in Frank's hand. "If Lily struggles, this can help. Use wisely." The irony almost made me laugh. Frank, ever the father, even in death preparing a lifeline for the daughter who had turned her love into a transaction. He had hidden this from me too, trusting perhaps that one day it might soften what greed hardened. But Eric had found it first. That fact alone twisted my stomach. How long had he known? Had he hidden it, waiting for the right moment to snatch it away? I looked at Lily, her face blotched from tears, her hands trembling in her lap. She didn't notice the calculation in my gaze. She only saw the mother she thought she had broken returning to comfort her. "We'll go to the bank," I told her gently. "Tomorrow. Together." Her relief spilled out in a sob. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you." That night, after she had retreated to the guest room, I sat alone at the kitchen table with Frank's second envelope before me. I traced the key with my fingertip, thinking of his quiet foresight. Even from beyond the grave, Frank was guiding the game. And me? I was no longer the widow clinging to scraps of memory. I was the custodian of his strategy, the executor of lessons. The fall had begun, for Lily, for Eric, for all their illusions. And the door, despite everything, was open. The bank smelled of waxed floors and stale air conditioning, that peculiar mixture of sterility and authority. Lily walked half a step behind me, her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting like a fugitive's. She had dressed hastily, creased blouse, jeans too thin for the chill morning. Not the daughter who once strutted into restaurants in tailored dresses, chin tilted high. This Lily was frayed, unraveling. At the counter, Carter was already waiting. He nodded once, discreet, his presence a reminder that I was never alone in this anymore. The clerk examined the key, compared it with her log, and finally handed us a narrow box. She set us in a small private room with gray walls and no windows. The sound of the lock clicking open echoed like a verdict. Inside lay velvet pouches and a sealed flash drive. Lily gasped. Her fingers trembled as she untied the first pouch, spilling pearls across the table. They rolled like pale moons, catching the light. Another pouch held gold bangles, their curves etched with delicate patterns. A third revealed diamonds, small but clear, set in rings and earrings. I recognized some pieces: Frank's mother's necklace, my grandmother's brooch. Others were unfamiliar, new acquisitions hidden away from even me. At the bottom was the flash drive, labeled in Frank's careful script. Choices. I inserted it into Carter's laptop. The screen lit with Frank's face, his voice carrying across the sterile room. "Evelyn, if you are here, then Lily has reached the edge of something. These jewels, about 200,000 in value, are not wealth, not really. They are simply tools. Wealth is not numbers, it is choices. Remember that." Lily's eyes widened at the figure. Her breathing quickened. She spread the jewels into neat columns. Sell, keep, evaluate. Her lips moved silently, already calculating debts, already translating memory into money. I watched her detached. To her this was salvation. To me it was a modest sum, no more than a single corner of Frank's quiet empire. The irony was sharp. Using Dad's legacy to cover Eric's debts? I asked, my voice calm but edged. "I have no choice," she snapped too quickly. Then softer, almost pleading. "Mom, I can't let them take everything. The bank volunteer told me to start with collateralized loans. If I pay those, maybe I can breathe." Her words spilled like rehearsed lines from a survival manual. Carter leaned forward. "Eric owes over 200,000, much of it under your forged signature. Fighting that fraud in court would cost at least 50,000 in legal fees. And there's no guarantee." Lily's face crumpled. "So I'm trapped? I pay or I drown." I met Carter's gaze. He understood. "Proceed quietly," I said. "Don't tell her." He nodded. That night, Lily sat at the dining table with the jewels spread before her like an altar. She picked up a pearl necklace, held it to her throat, then set it down again with a sigh. Her tears fell not for the money, but for memory. The faint scent of her grandmother's perfume, the echo of Frank fastening the clasp around my neck. I watched from the doorway. She saw the past and the price in the same object, unable to separate them. Later, when she thought I slept, she whispered to herself, "This is all I have left." She was wrong. She still had me. But whether she deserved me, that was another matter entirely. The papers arrived in a neat stack on Carter's desk. Proof of Eric's sham. A marriage contracted for residency. Debts signed in Lily's name without her consent. Accounts opened and abandoned with her forged signature. Fraud clear as ink on paper. With this she could be freed. But I didn't rush to tell her. Because sometimes rescue too soon means the lesson is never learned. I watched her unravel day by day. For 2 weeks, she lived under my roof not as a daughter, but as a tenant of necessity. She rose late, her once manicured hands trembling as she dialed creditors, begging for extensions. She scrolled job postings until her eyes glazed, then closed the laptop with a groan. At night she cried quietly in the guest room, thinking I couldn't hear. When food appeared on the table, she ate without comment. When bills were paid, she never asked how. Silence had replaced her old superiority. One morning she shuffled into the kitchen with swollen eyes. They won't take me anywhere. Every interview they ask about experience, about references. I have nothing. You have debts, I replied coldly, sipping my tea. That is something. She flinched. But she didn't argue. By the end of the week she found a job cleaning offices at night. Minimum wage, fluorescent lights, rubber gloves that left red marks on her wrists. The first night she returned, her shoulders sagged as if she carried the entire building on her back. She collapsed into a chair, silent. Wasted chances or no chances? Her supervisor had asked, she told me later. And Lily, my daughter who once demanded champagne at every celebration, had whispered, wasted. It was the first honest word I had heard from her in years. She sold the jewels piece by piece. The pearl necklace gone. The gold bangles pawned. The brooch melted into cash. Only my engagement ring and my grandmother's necklace remained. She held those with trembling fingers and said, "Not these. These I keep." Her debts shrank slowly, like ice melting in winter sun. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. But the mountain still loomed. I waited. I let her scrub toilets by night, bargain with bankers by day, live frugally in my house where every meal came without price tags. It was cruel. I knew it. But cruelty can carve truth where comfort only fattens lies. Carter called one evening. We can clear her name with these documents. The fraud will be erased. She'll owe nothing. Not yet, I said. She needs to feel the weight. Otherwise she'll never understand. He hesitated. You're playing with fire. I'm teaching with fire, I corrected. That night I found her at the table again, staring at the last jewels. Tears streaked her cheeks, but she didn't reach for me. She only whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry," to the pearls she could not sell. I turned away before she saw my own tears. Because she wasn't speaking to Frank. She was speaking to herself. And that was the beginning of bedrock. I chose the day carefully. Not after she had worked a shift. Not when she was fragile with exhaustion. I wanted her clear-eyed, braced for impact. A Saturday morning, sunlight pouring through lace curtains, the kitchen quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sit, I told her. Lily lowered herself into the chair, wary. Her hair hung limp around her face, shadows under her eyes betraying sleepless nights. She had stopped painting her nails, stopped curling her hair. Vanity stripped away by debt and fatigue. I placed a folder before her. Open it. Her hands trembled as she lifted the flap. Inside were Carter's neatly arranged documents. Bank records, forged signatures, Eric's falsified marriage contract, affidavits of fraud. At the top, stamped in bold letters, exonerated. She read in silence. Her lips parted, then closed again. Finally, she whispered, "This clears me? The debts, none of them are mine?" "Correct," I said. "Who paid for this?" Her eyes darted to mine, suspicion flickering. I placed a second folder on the table. "Open this too." Inside lay the truth. Deeds, account summaries, business shares, all stamped with the name Franklin Holdings, LLC. Each document bore my signature, not hers. The loft building, the lake house, the businesses, the accounts, all mine. She stared as though the papers burned her fingers. Her voice cracked. "When did you know?" "When you came back," I said evenly. "I knew the moment you stood in my doorway asking to stay." Her breath hitched. "You saw me working nights? You watched me sell jewelry? And you said nothing?" "Yes." She slammed her fist against the table, a hollow sound. "Why? Why would you let me suffer like that?" I leaned forward, my voice sharp as glass. "Because money pays bills, Lily, but it doesn't fix character. You didn't just take property. You took respect. You took trust. You reduced your father's life's work to price tags. I had to give those things back to you in a form you could never pawn or spend." Her tears spilled, but they weren't the old crocodile tears of manipulation. These were different, raw, jagged, born of recognition. "I thought," her voice cracked. "I thought you had nothing left. I thought Eric and I had to. You thought wrong." My words cut like knives. "Your father spent decades making sure I'd never be at the mercy of anyone, least of all you. He hid it so your love wouldn't be bought by what we owned. And in the end he was right. She buried her face in her hands. Her sobs echoed through the kitchen, sharp, broken. For the first time I did not reach out to comfort her. I let her cry. I let the weight of truth press down until she could no longer pretend. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were swollen, but her voice steadier. You forgave me? Yes, I said. But forgiveness doesn't erase. It rebuilds. Can you forgive yourself? She didn't answer. Not then. But her silence was no longer defiance. It was shame. And shame I knew was the seed of change. The morning after the reveal, the house felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lily emerged from the guest room slowly, her steps hesitant, her eyes swollen from a night of tears. She didn't meet my gaze. For once there was no makeup, no mask, only a face stripped bare by shame. Carter arrived promptly at 9. He carried 2 leather folders and wore the same calm expression he always did, though I noticed the faint flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He knew justice when he saw it. He set the folders on the table. Mrs. Hart, he said formally, everything is finalized. All fraudulent debts have been voided. All sales reversed. The loft is under your name exclusively. The businesses remain secure. He turned his gaze toward Lily. You are legally free of Eric's debts. The banks will be notified within 48 hours. Lily exhaled as though she had been holding her breath for months. Relief flickered across her face, but it didn't bloom into the arrogance I once knew. Instead, she looked down, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Thank you, she whispered, not to Carter but to me. I said nothing. Carter gathered his things. One more thing. Mrs. Hart, you asked me to prepare amendments to your will. Those are ready whenever you decide. I nodded. We'll discuss later. After he left, silence filled the kitchen again. Lily sat across from me, her hands fidgeting like a child caught in a lie. Finally she spoke. Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, I said, my voice steady. You don't. Her eyes filled, but I held her gaze. But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. I chose to forgive because I refused to live chained to your betrayal. But don't confuse forgiveness with forgetting. We are not going back to mother and child. Those years are gone. From now on we are adults. Equals. Partners if you earn it. She nodded slowly as though absorbing each word. You want me to keep working? She asked cautiously. Yes, I said. Quit the job if you want, but I hope you don't. Work teaches what comfort never does. Value, patience, humility. You spent years measuring love and money. Now you will learn its real measure. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't hide them. I will. I promise. The weeks that followed were strange, fragile, like walking on glass. Lily kept her cleaning job, though she added shifts at a local shelter answering phones. At first I thought it was penance, a way to exhaust herself. But slowly I saw something else taking shape: discipline. She began to contribute at home. Small things at first, buying groceries with her own wages, leaving bills for utilities on the counter with her name scribbled on them. The amounts were modest, but the gesture mattered. Neighbors noticed. Martha, who had always whispered rumors with relish, pulled me aside one afternoon. I see Lily at the bus stop every morning with her work clothes. That's new. Her eyes narrowed shrewdly. You've done something, Evelyn. Cruel and wise at once. I said nothing, only smiled faintly. Evenings on the porch became quieter. Sometimes Lily sat beside me, her hands raw from scrubbing floors, her shoulders slumped. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words were softer, stripped of entitlement. One night she surprised me. I've been thinking about going back to school. Social work. Helping women who end up like me. Maybe it's stupid. It's not stupid, I said. But you'll do it on your own terms. Earn the chance, don't buy it. She nodded. I want to. Step by step. For the first time in years I believed her. Our relationship was no longer rescuer and dependent. No longer the silent provider and the grasping child. It was something harder, sharper, more fragile. A contract between adults. And though it would never erase the betrayal, it carried the possibility of respect. The letter about Eric's arrest arrived in an envelope thin as paper but heavy as stone. Fraud. Residency scam. Warrants abroad. Bangkok had not been his playground after all, it had become his cage. When I showed it to Lily, she didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She only exhaled, long and steady, as though releasing the last ounce of illusion. I feel nothing, she said flatly. Not hate. Not grief. Just nothing. That, I thought, was closure. A month later, on a Sunday bright with early autumn sun, Lily asked if we could go back to the lake house. The words caught me off guard. I had avoided suggesting it, unsure whether she was ready, or whether I was. But she looked at me with eyes stripped of pretense. I need to see it again, she whispered. So we went. The drive wound through hills painted gold and rust, leaves scattering across the road like old memories shaken loose. The Chevy wagon hummed steadily, Frank's ghost in every turn of the wheel. Lily sat in the passenger seat, quiet, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When the lake appeared, glittering like a sheet of glass beneath the sun, her breath hitched. The cream-colored house stood waiting, just as it always had, as though time had been holding its breath. We stepped inside together. The air smelled of dust and pine, the floorboards creaked beneath our weight. Every room carried Frank. His chair by the window, the dent in the wall from Lily's teenage outburst. The curtains I sewed by hand 30 years ago. Lily touched the banister, her fingers lingering. I almost sold this, she whispered, voice breaking. I reduced all of this to a number. I was blind. Her words hung in the still air. Heavy true. We spent the day repairing small things. A loose hinge on the door. A shutter that rattled in the wind. I oiled the porch swing while Lily scrubbed the dust from the windows. It became a ritual of reconnection. A way of mending more than just wood and glass. At sunset we sat on the porch. The lake shimmered orange and gold. Lily turned to me, her face flushed with work and emotion. Mom, she said softly, I don't want this house to just be ours anymore. It shouldn't be. I want it to mean something. For women like me, women who've lost everything, who made mistakes, who need a place to start over. A refuge. What do you think? I studied her. For once I saw not greed in her eyes but purpose. The best sanctuaries are shared, I said slowly. Frank always opened our home. Perhaps now it should open wider. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Then let's do it. We left that evening with a plan. To transform grief and capital into shelter. To rewrite the house's legacy from betrayal to rebirth. As the Chevy rumbled back toward the city, I looked at my daughter, my flawed, chastened, humbled daughter, and thought, maybe this was Frank's plan all along. 6 months later, life had rearranged itself into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar yet steady, like a song I had never heard but already knew the tune. Lily entered a master's program in social work, stubbornly insisting on funding it herself. I need to walk the path, not be carried, she told me. She took on extra shifts, filled out scholarships, and lived frugally without complaint. Every receipt she handed me wasn't proof of need. It was proof of accountability. Evenings on the porch became sacred again. We sat side by side in silence, watching the sky bleed from pink to indigo, listening to the lake whisper through the trees. Sometimes Lily spoke, sometimes not. But the quiet no longer suffocated. It felt earned. Martha, our neighbor with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, leaned over one evening as we crossed paths. You were harsh, Evelyn, she said, her voice a mixture of accusation and admiration. But you were the wisest mother I've ever seen. I smiled faintly. Wisdom is just pain that finally made sense. News of Eric trickled back from abroad. Arrested for marriage fraud, facing years in prison. When Lily read the letter, she didn't cry. She didn't rage. She only folded it neatly and said, "Good. Closure." On Sundays we returned often to the lake house. Every visit was another stitch in a tapestry of repair. Lily apologized again, not for nearly selling it, but for reducing 40 years of memory into a transaction. We painted walls, scrubbed floors, patched the roof. With every brushstroke, the house shifted from relic to promise. By winter, the first guests arrived. 2 women escaping violent marriages, clutching their children like shields. They walked through the doorway trembling, uncertain. I recognized that tremor. It was the tremor of being erased. We gave them food, beds, warmth. Lily sat with them late into the night, her voice low, her presence steady. Watching her listen, not speak, not command, but listen, felt like witnessing a different woman. Our foundation began to take shape. A refuge for women abandoned, betrayed, or erased by those who promised love. Frank's house had become more than memory. It had become shelter. And I realized something. Grief, when transmuted, becomes fuel. One evening, Lily came home exhausted, her hands raw from work, her books heavy in her bag. She sat across from me at the table and whispered, "I used to think love meant comfort. Now I know it means work." I nodded. Love is work. Money doesn't save us, choices do. We looked at each other, not as mother and child locked in old roles, but as two women bound by scars walking side by side. A letter from Eric arrived from prison, scrawled and desperate. Lily tore it open, read 2 lines and slid it into the trash. Not out of hatred. Out of nothingness. He no longer had weight in her life. Love isn't what flatters, she told me one night. It's what teaches, even when it hurts. I looked at the stars and whispered to Frank. Justice came not as revenge but as education. The lake house stood ready for its next guests. Our work expanding, our mission sharpening. We were no longer bound only as mother and daughter. We had become 2 women who chose each other again. Our wealth was not the deeds, not the accounts, not the jewels. Wealth was the ability to act. Our work was not just scrubbing or building. It was carving meaning out of betrayal. And what endures? Respect, responsibility, and the cold clarity of love that no storm can break. This is what remains when betrayal burns everything else away.